and welcome to They Say It Takes a Village. My name is Raya. I've got 2 little boys, a full-time job, and now I'm adding amateur podcaster to the mix. So it's safe to say that it really does take a village, at least for me to raise my kids. This podcast is aimed to give moms a fun, unfiltered, and an informative outlet to navigate all things motherhood. Join me each week as I interview one of our local heroes from my village who make mom life just that bit easier. Think of me as your personal mom group, bringing you recommendations when you need it the most. Having said all that, let's get into today's show. They say everyone wants to hold the baby, but who holds the mom? Hi everyone, and thank you for joining me on another episode of They Say It Takes a Village. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Rose Logan as we discuss the topic of pre- and postnatal mental health and how this particular subject would impact society as a whole. Dr. Rose is a UK-trained psychologist who is qualified to work across the board on different clinical presentations. She has a special interest in maternal and infant mental health and has worked extensively supporting women and families in the pre- and postnatal period. She also recently completed a diploma in infant mental health. She's well known for her responsive, person-centered approach and brings a compassionate stance to her practice. She believes that relationships are a vehicle of change and sees it as a privilege to support clients as they move towards engaging a full and meaningful life. Just to add as well, Dr. Rose had recently just opened her beautiful new practice called the Free Spirit Collective right here in City Walk. Dr. Rose, thank you. Thank you so much for your time and welcome to They Say It Takes a Village.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure having you on. I'm so excited to delve into this topic. I know a lot of women are eager to find out and get a bit more information to raise awareness. I think there is a degree of lack of information out there on this. So thank you.
Pleasure.
Do you want to tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself, about your practice and what you practice and how long have you been living in the UAE?
For sure. So I've been in the UAE now for 8 years, and before the UAE I was in Kuwait for 4 years, so 12 years in the GCC.
Lovely.
And I moved here really straight off the back of completing my doctorate, so I've really been shaped by my experiences living here, my experiences with my clients here. Yeah. So the main body of my work is individual work, both with the individual, I suppose, but also sometimes with family system as well.
Yeah.
But in the new centre, we're planning on providing a lot more group programs and workshops and more experiential offerings that kind of, I guess, break the traditional paradigm of individual therapy and get more people through the door to engage in mental health and well-being.
Oh, it's lovely. I feel now we're in your meditation room and it looks fantastic. I feel like once you open officially, I'll be the first one here. Of course, to just sort of delve right in, I feel like, this particular topic, there is, and it is quite sensitive. And a lot of the times you get phrases thrown out there without proper definition.
Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, when people are referring to pre- and postnatal depression, pre- and postnatal anxiety, what are the exact definition for these type of things?
So if we start with pre- and postnatal depression, it's a shift or change in an individual's mood, either during their pregnancy or after they give birth.
Yeah.
And really follows the same diagnostic criteria as any other depression, any other depressive episode. So might be a reduction in pleasure, might be a change in self-esteem, self-worth, more negative thinking patterns, might feel a sense of being overwhelmed or kind of struggling with tearfulness, might notice changes in appetite, sleep, maybe a bit more irritable, feeling like they can't cope with things, sometimes even just feeling like it's difficult to get up and do the day.
Yeah, not able to cope with it. So
that change in mood that perhaps we might experience naturally day to day. Some days you wake up and you feel energized and you're ready to go, and other days you're like, oh, how am I going to do this?
I don't want to do it today. No adulting for me.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to adult today, but it's a bit more pervasive. It's a bit more recurrent. It's day to day that change in mood persists, and there's no alleviation in that.
Does that differ with pre and postnatal anxiety?
So the symptoms would be quite different with anxiety. Yeah. So anxiety is usually characterized by a persistent sense of worry or threat or danger, which will show up in both physical symptoms, so maybe heart racing, feeling very tense, sweating, sometimes even things like numbness or tingling people will experience, and it might be on your face or your hands, but also in your thoughts. So pervasive worry, catastrophizing, and then often a lot of control type behaviors, trying to arrange things or organize things or obsess on things to try and relieve the anxiety. Unfortunately, that usually ends up compounding the anxiety.
And I mean, just going back to the depression, you mentioned that the symptoms are quite the same as depression itself. Is the only difference the period at which is the onset?
Exactly. Okay. Exactly. So when we talk about postnatal depression, we're talking about a depressive episode that starts in the first year after a woman gives birth.
Oh, wow. So it's till the first year.
Till the end of the first year, it will still be considered postnatal depression. And sometimes it starts in the first year, but extends beyond the first year, and that would still probably be considered postnatal depression.
Okay. So, I mean, is there almost like a link with the pregnancy? Is it hormonally driven? Is it, I don't know.
It's a good question. And I think, there's almost certainly for some women, maybe lots of women, a hormonal element to it. Yeah. But with any mental health diagnosis, there tend to be multiple factors, and we sometimes break those down into biological, psychological, social, sometimes spiritual factors as well. And so hormones may play a part. They'd be a biological factor in somebody developing postnatal depression, or even prenatal depression as well. Yeah. But unlikely that would be the only reason why somebody develops.
So you kind of look at it holistically.
Exactly. Yeah. You want to look at the whole person, their whole experience, going back into some of their previous experiences, family history, things like that. What other stressors are around?
Yeah, that was literally my other question. Is it that people are more predisposed to having depression? I mean, is anyone at risk, or is it just something that, sort of, if you do this and you eat right and sleep well, and you could potentially avoid it?
That's a really great question. So I'm going to break it into two questions, or two answers, if I may. So the first question is, is everybody at risk? Without sounding really catastrophizing, yes, anybody can develop postnatal depression. There's not always a really clear reason why some people do, some people don't. I think you used the word like a predisposition or vulnerability. So we look at what are called risk factors. And so we can use the kind of identification of risk factors to perhaps see that somebody might be at risk, more likely to develop postnatal depression, or less likely. And then on paper that's the case, and in reality it might be the other way around, because it's the interaction of all these factors that matters. Okay. So can we prevent people from developing postnatal depression? There's not a kind of an easy answer to that. Probably have to say no in essence. Are there things we can do to try and safeguard and kind of lessen the likelihood and also lessen the impact? Absolutely. Okay. So you mentioned some lifestyle things like eating well and sleeping. And
the one that we all hope to achieve.
We all aim for. Yeah. So, and things like a really good social support network. If you do have a previous experience of a mental health problem, it is one of the risk factors. And so if I know that a woman has had depression in the past or anxiety in the past, I might be saying, listen, you're pregnant, maybe we should be thinking about what this looks like. What are the red flags? How do we kind of help you to stay as well as possible and to catch any change in mood when it happens?
So almost preemptively, you sort of put your support in place just to, you know, sort of know that there is somebody there to almost catch you.
Yeah. We have risk factors, so the things that make it more likely that somebody develops a mental health problem, including postnatal depression. Yeah. And then we have protective factors. Okay. And they're often the inverse of each other. Okay. So poor social support is a risk factor. Yep. Good social support is a protective factor.
I see.
So we can kind of use the inverse to support women to hopefully try and make sure they don't develop postnatal depression, or if they do, we catch it early.
Yeah. I think something that I've always wondered about is, let's say you've experienced, you know, sort of some form of post or prenatal depression with your first, let's say.
Yes.
Is this something that people can sort of expect to see with their subsequent children, or is it a sort of an isolated thing? You know, it's one of these things that people, you know, going into a pregnancy, there's a lot of worries and anxieties. And I think mental health is a big one. Yeah. So you know, again, this was a personal thing that I've always wondered about. Yes. That would it actually, you know, sort of occur with every child that you potentially have, so if you've had it the first time?
Yeah, not 100% predictive. Okay. So if you have postnatal depression with your first pregnancy and your first baby, it's not a kind of causal relationship to say that then you will definitely have it in future pregnancies. Yeah. It is a risk factor. So it's a vulnerability. So we know if somebody's had postnatal depression in the past, we want to be taking good care when they're in their future pregnancies to safeguard as much as possible, to educate as much as possible, to put those protective factors into play and to give them that support. But they may not.
They may not feel that same way. Yeah. It's funny.
And likewise, the other happens. Yeah. Some people don't have postnatal depression with their first, and then they suddenly go, oh my goodness, with my second, I'd never experienced this before, and now it's hit me.
Yeah. It wasn't, in my case, it wasn't so much the depression, it was anxiety. I felt for the second time around, it was funny. Yeah. Yeah. We'll get to that one a little bit later. I think also, a lot of the times, again, it's, you know, unfortunately, Dr. Google is one of, you know, this thing that, I mean, every single human being on earth, you know, sort of you type in something at Google, and of course, Google's going to populate what you want to see. So a lot of the times you hear the word baby blues. Yes. And baby blues, I don't know if that is an actual occurrence, or is it something that you need to be mindful of for something a bit more, you know, something that you need to get support for. Yeah,
I think this is a really, really valuable distinction, and it's one that gets a bit blurred, and people refer to postnatal depression as baby blues. So you were asking about hormones earlier, and so baby blues is probably more easily relatable to hormones. It occurs in the first 2 to 4 weeks after birth. So it starts in the first 2 weeks and usually resolves within the first 4 weeks. And it's a completely normal part of that early newborn stage, transitions. Often people will link it to when their milk comes in, if they're breastfeeding, they become more tearful, they become overwhelmed, you kind of, all of that adrenaline that you were running on for the first couple of days subsides, and you're sleep deprived, and your milk comes in, there's hormone changes. And so it's quite normal for many women in the first couple of weeks after they give birth to have a shift in mood. Yeah. And it can look a little bit like depression, more tearful, I'm not coping, I'm overwhelmed. I don't know how I'm doing this. I don't even know if I'm doing it right. I don't think I can go out with the baby. And what we're looking for is that resolves within the first kind of 4 weeks or so after birth. If the change in mood happens after that 2 to 4 weeks post-birth, or if it persists or gets worse after that point, then we're looking at potentially a postnatal mood disorder like postnatal depression. And
do you find that that's probably the best time to seek support?
Yeah, I would usually say, certainly I say to women who I've supported through their pregnancy, I usually say, look, if it's the first couple of weeks, by all means come and talk about it, but I'm not going to get worried about it. If it's still there after 4 or 5 weeks, then I really would encourage you to either come back and see me, or go and see your GP, or speak to your obstetrician, and just get a bit of an idea from them about what might be going on here.
Okay. And I mean, you touched on it earlier, that you kind of look at it from a lot of angles on how to actually define pre and postnatal depression.
Yes.
Does that also, is that a part of the diagnosis? I mean, how would you go about diagnosing somebody? What are the steps for diagnosis? I mean, high level, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there are diagnostic criteria for all mental health diagnosis. And so we're looking at a certain number of those to be present in order for a diagnosis of depression to be given. Okay. And I think you were mentioning earlier when we were talking about severity.
Yes.
And so the number of symptoms that are present or observable determines the level of severity.
Okay.
As well as how severe those actual symptoms are. So if you have, I think it's up to 3, then it would be mild, and then I can't remember exactly the cutoffs, but they are determining mild, moderate, severe.
Okay.
Obviously, the symptoms themselves will also give a guide as to how severe somebody's experience is. Yeah,
that was also another thing in terms of, I'm assuming it's a full range of severities.
Yes, absolutely.
And, somebody might come to you just needing a bit of support, and then, would that reflect in terms of treatment as well?
Yes, absolutely. So, for some people, their depression might be quite mild. They might even find resolution through their natural support systems. I think definitely it's always valuable to speak to a mental health professional or your GP, but may not need a huge amount of treatment. Yeah. Once we move into more moderate and certainly severe symptoms, the treatment changes. So mild to moderate, we would say your normal support systems and therapy, talk therapies, group therapies would be your kind of treatment that you would go to. Moderate to severe, the recommendations, if you look at kind of the National Health Service in the UK, for example, the recommendations are therapy and also, if indicated, medication.
Okay. So that would be, in terms of actual medication.
Yes.
This is something that is I want to say that it's not like somebody presents to your office and your practice and, immediately that would be something that you would go to.
The only caveat I would say to that is if somebody's presenting and the symptoms are already quite severe, and sometimes the symptoms can be things like suicidal thoughts or difficulties with relating to their baby, or even wanting, in the most severe situations, wanting to harm their baby or not feeling safe with their baby.
These intrusive thoughts.
Exactly. Then we might go straight to medication, because you need to help somebody to feel safe before they can access a more therapeutic modality. But typically we would kind of do a little bit of an assessment and then recommend, if we felt it was necessary, that they seek a medication, and that could be through their GP. Or usually I prefer that they see a psychiatrist who's, they're especially trained in mental health to prescribe the medication.
A lot of, again, it's one of these things, if you have, for example, again, the whole family history and previous, previous situations where depression may have played a part in their life, do you find that may also exacerbate the severity, or could that person be a little bit more likely to develop?
So as a risk factor, yes, it does kind of increase the likelihood that somebody might develop symptoms. In terms of how it impacts severity, it's actually an interesting question, because I'm not sure there is a direct link between previous experience or a family history and severity. Sometimes people have got no history of mental illness, and actually their symptoms really start quite severe from the very beginning. It's difficult to predict sometimes how somebody will experience their mental health.
Specifically talking about pre and postnatal periods, I find it's such a delicate time that if there isn't the support, you can't really do it alone.
Nope.
And I feel a lot of the times, this whole topic can potentially be brushed off as, oh, it's just baby blues. This is
Yes.
a normal part of having a baby.
Yeah.
And a lot of the times people either, number one, go undiagnosed, or they just don't talk about it.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's so many reasons. I think, like you said, it can easily be minimized.
Yeah.
And kind of, well, you're tired, you haven't slept,
Yeah.
baby blues.
You'll feel so much
normal.
better after a nap.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that's true.
Yes, I've definitely felt much better after
me too.
a good extended period of sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. But, and I highly recommend sleep, but I do think that people tend to minimize it. It will pass, it will go, it's a phase, it's baby blues. There's a kind of, still a little bit of a stigma around admitting that you're struggling.
Yeah.
And there is
this
definitely...
sort of super mom, I've got it all under control.
Term.
Yeah.
Like as if anybody was meant to put on a cape each morning and parent.
No.
It's just not possible.
Yeah.
There are some days where you feel like you nailed it, and there are other days, which I will say probably more of the time, you feel like you just dropped the ball at every given moment.
Or just even, just picking up whatever is you can in your realm of capabilities. I feel like just meeting the expectation. Babies are fed, they've got clothes, they've eaten, they're not crying.
This is good.
I've done a really good job today.
This is good.
Yeah.
So I do think people minimize it, they brush it off. There's also sometimes fear because people don't understand what postnatal depression is, or what the trajectory of it is, or the prognosis of it. And so people get scared, what happens if I go and tell somebody that I feel this way? Or even particularly if the symptoms are more around harm either to themselves or the baby, will my baby be taken away from me?
Yeah.
And thankfully that is
not
very, very rarely the case, unless there is genuinely a need, and it would only then hopefully be very, very temporary. Actually, it's not going to happen. People are going to work to keep you and your baby together and keep you safe and keep you well. Yeah.
So, with that, do you have any particular red flags when you've just had a baby, and the fact that you probably, let's assume you've got a person who's never experienced these type of sort of major mood shift in their whole life, and they've had a baby and they're not feeling right. They've passed that 4-week mark. We did sort of touch on that, but anything sort of more specific, like something that you would really think, okay, no, you know what, I do need a bit of support, I need a bit of help here. And I know as new moms, number one, it's, should I bring the baby, leave the baby? That's also an issue. But when do you think that, no, this is getting a bit serious, I need to see a professional?
I think I would always say don't wait till it feels serious.
Yeah.
Because I think one thing we're very clear is that the sooner we're able to get in and support a woman and her family and her baby, they're a dyad. So I'm always really happy to see mums with their babies, just to answer that question.
A lovely place for them to sit.
I think that it's when these feelings of low self-worth and not coping and tearful and I don't know if I can do this and I'm not enjoying this, I'm not enjoying anything, perhaps mood change. So it's not passing, it's not lifting, it's persistent, it's every day, might be getting worse. The red flags are hard to kind of pinpoint as one specific thing, because it's such a constellation of experiences. But it's when whatever your change is, whatever changes for you, when it's not alleviating, when it's persistent, when it's potentially even getting worse, that's when I would say just come and have a conversation. And you're never going to waste anybody's time by coming and saying, and I think that's a fear. A lot of women say, but there are other people who are worse or might be struggling more. I'm okay, I can manage. I always say, just come and have a conversation.
It's true. The I'm okay, I can manage. I think me personally, I've said it 50,000 times.
Yes, of course. Because that's what we're told we're supposed to be able to do when we have a baby, is we're able to manage.
I don't know. It's a minefield of these type of phrases, and I feel it puts such a wrong expectation. And people really do get carried away, and then throw in life and social media and what's on the internet. You can really get sort of lost in it.
Absolutely. And I guess I really liked the title of your podcast when you introduced it. I was like, it really does take a village, and sometimes people are scared to ask for that support.
It's true. I mean, like I said, I mean, it's something that I needed. I needed the support. And the first person to put my hand up and say, look, I'm not coping very well. Do you think you can come and do this for me? Yeah. You're not supposed to, by no means, raise a child on your own. No. And if you can, of course, I mean, there's lots of different parenting setups, but you do need external support for you, I find, you know? Yeah. So, I guess, is there any other postnatal mental health concerns when women have babies? Yep. Aside, of course, from the big one, which is depression and anxiety. Yeah. Anything else that kind of, do you see?
So, like you said, the main postnatal mood concerns are depression or anxiety. Anxiety has quite a broad definition here, but as it relates to specific diagnosis, a woman postnatally might develop a kind of specific anxiety disorder, or it might be a more general anxiety about the baby, about kind of how she's managing cleanliness. Yeah. So that can actually drift into other more specific diagnoses as well. Yeah. The other kind of pregnancy specific or postnatal specific diagnosis is one called postpuerperal psychosis, which is actually quite uncommon. Okay. So definitely not to scare people, but that's a psychotic experience or a psychotic episode that is specifically related to the postnatal period. Okay. But it is very uncommon, very rare. But it does happen. Yeah. So the birth people know about it.
Good to know that it is there. Do you think that let's say somebody has kind of left it and swept it under the rug and I'll manage. What could potentially happen if left untreated? Yeah.
I mean, severity can get worse. It can get worse. I suppose it's often how it then impacts the other relationships that around the woman, including with her baby, or if she has other children as well. So women who have postnatal depression might struggle with attachment and bonding with their baby. They may find it hard, not necessarily to do the caregiving, the feeding, the diapering, but the emotional part may be impacted. And that actually can have longer term impacts for both the mother and the baby, but also the child that baby grows into to become.
So it's almost like it does affect that unit.
Yes,
and the
they're
other
a dyad,
relations.
and there's no way of kind of separating the two in that early phase.
And I suppose maybe, I'm not sure, but it might trickle into your relationship with your partner.
Absolutely.
With other kids. Yeah. It might start to affect work. I don't know. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think also just from a kind of physical health perspective, you sometimes, and it's a symptom that I haven't actually mentioned, is really about self-care, being able to take care of your kind of your diet and exercise. And so there can be physical health implications that are perhaps not quite so obvious, but because there's no energy, there's no pleasure, there's no drive to go out and do things, that self-care and even things like hygiene can suffer, like not wanting to get up and get dressed and showered or not even dressed. I do not necessarily,
just maybe take a shower
and put on a clean pair of pajamas.
Exactly.
That would be
exactly enough. No, I get what you mean, because there is a tendency to, if you're not feeling right, it's almost like everything becomes almost a huge undertaking. It's a big task. Yeah. And you might just not want to. Yeah. Just to circle back with treatment.
Yes.
That I would assume it is a very, it's an individual approach to all. There's no sort of one size fits all when it comes to this type of thing.
No, I think that's true. And really therapy is such an individual process. Right. And I certainly work from a perspective where I don't go in with a kind of a single modality or a single treatment plan. It's got to be adapted and tailored to the person. Medication is the same. The medication that's helpful for one person might not be for others. There are certain medications that tend to be preferable during the postnatal period because there's only a limited number that you can breastfeeding. However, things like group therapy can be really effective, just as they can for depression and any other time of life. A postnatal mood group can also be very, very effective. So that doesn't necessarily tailor it individually, but it creates a space where the individual is kind of seen and heard and treated within a group.
That's right. So it's almost like you do have a toolkit that you potentially try. What may not work with one may work with the
That's
other.
a great way of putting it, is that toolkit.
Yeah. I'm going to have to ask, basically, let's say a lot of the times, a lot of emphasis is placed on the mental health of a woman who's just had a baby. I've read dads can also experience some form of depression.
Yes.
Do you see that often?
So probably a little bit what you were saying earlier about people brushing things under the carpet.
Yeah.
It's not something I see a lot of, but it's certainly something that we know from research, from perhaps other places around the world where these conversations are perhaps more mature in their kind of evolution. Yeah. Men do experience something akin to a postnatal depression. Yeah. And I think, it's easy to forget the transition that dads go through. Yeah. They don't go through the physical transition, they don't give birth, but they certainly become
Life
fathers.
Does change,
It changes.
It changes, and there's a whole set of new responsibilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
That can be quite daunting.
Yeah.
Do you think my other question to that might be a bit more complicated? But do you
try me? I'll do my best.
But do you think that if there is a partner, do you think that if let's say a dad has a partner who his wife or partner is suffering from some sort of depression, do you think that may also affect his ability to cope? Do you see that as a...
It can do. I think you're also touching here on a really important point when we're thinking about why depression goes untreated or unrecognised. Is there's a lack of awareness and a lack of knowledge about depression. And so if your partner, whether it's your husband or your wife, whichever way around it is, if they're struggling, if they're suffering and you don't really understand why, it can be really difficult to know how to help and how to support them. And that can definitely have an impact because you then don't have the support in a broader sense for either of you.
Yeah. And assuming, for example, you've got a couple that comes in or a mom that comes in, what would be the first step to come in and have a conversation?
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. So come in and first session anyway, whether it's postnatal or any other client, is really an opportunity to get a picture of what's going on for them right now and to start to build a context around that. There are some kind of more formal questionnaire measures that we sometimes give in that first session that help give a slightly more objective picture. Yeah. But mainly it's about an assessment of that person's mood, what's changed, what's going on, who's helping, what support do they have. And then towards the end of that, starting to think about, okay, what are the treatment needs here?
Because the reason why I ask, I find taking that first step is probably the hardest.
Yeah.
So if you have an idea of what an assessment could potentially mean, I find that may ease the anxiety going into it. So, I mean, a lot of the times going in for any type of appointment can be a bit nerve-wracking.
Absolutely.
Let alone one that is sensitive and, to have an idea that, it's just going to be a conversation, maybe some, and then moving forward, that is tailored to what you could potentially need.
And I think just to reassure anybody listening who is worried about maybe taking that step is that, from a therapy perspective, the therapy room is a completely non-judgmental space and,
because that's another factor.
Yeah, judgment, absolutely. A fear of being judged or seen as a bad mom and having a postnatal mood issue, whether it's anxiety or depression, does not make you a bad mom. Far from it. It's not any sort of judgment on your value as a parent or as a mum, whether you're a dad or a mum. Just reassuring people that assessment is not a judgment on you or how you're doing. It's just to try and work out how best to support you and to support you and your baby.
So not a scary experience by
I
any
hope
means.
not.
No,
I hope not.
I mean, even sitting across from you now does not seem intuitive. I mean, you're wonderful, so it's
I know. I hope it's actually people leave the assessment feeling reassured by some of the normalizing of that conversation. It's like, oh, this is not scary for me. Like, I've seen this. It's okay. I get what you're telling me. We can do something about this.
Absolutely. That I think that more than anything else probably even after the first visit, you'll feel a little bit, oh, okay, somebody's got my back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not the only one. A lot of women, I think, fear that it's just them. And again, it's another reason why people don't seek support, because they think it's bad or wrong and it's just them and everybody else is managing and I'm not.
Yeah.
So I'll just stay quiet and struggle and
yeah. Don't stay quiet and struggle.
No, don't. Please don't.
Get help.
Yeah.
Get help. Let's switch gears a little bit to anxiety.
Yep.
Something that which I should probably make an appointment with you and have a conversation. No, it's something that a lot of people, I think, again, it's such a broad word.
Yeah.
And I think lots of people at some point in their life have experienced anxiety or have felt a little bit anxious. And I'm not, of course, everyone gets a bit nervous, you know, big speeches or things like that. But I'm, a little bit more persistent.
Yes.
How would you define, I guess, let's sort of bracket it to pre and postnatal anxiety, even though you did touch on it at the start, but specifically anxiety.
Yeah. So you used the word persistent.
Yeah.
And I think that's really a core feature, is that whatever the worry is, that it doesn't alleviate, it doesn't pass. Because you're right, anxiety is actually a normal human experience. But it's the duration and the intensity of that experience. It doesn't alleviate, it persists, it disturbs your functioning. It stops you from focusing, or it prevents you from doing things that you would like to do. Anxiety often leads people into very avoidant behaviors in an effort to kind of reduce the anxiety. As it relates to pre and postnatal, a little bit like depression, from a diagnostic perspective, we don't have a prenatal anxiety diagnosis. It's anxiety.
It's anxiety,
And so the same as anxiety that you might notice in other times in your life, it's the intensity and it's the severity and the duration of that is what really makes it something clinical, as opposed to just a bit of anxiety that then comes, you ride the wave and it passes.
Yeah. You mentioned a little bit earlier about this catastrophe scenario.
Yes.
I think that's the one that sort of runs very much sort of close to home with me.
Yeah.
It was just always assuming the worst is going to happen.
Yeah.
Is that quite common?
Absolutely. You've got either you're pregnant or you've got this little baby, and you may or may not ever have done this before, but you have this ultimate responsibility.
Yeah.
And so often it's a kind of way of trying to work out how I'm going to protect my baby, how I'm going to make sure it's okay, but it runs into these kind of dark and twisty scenarios.
They'll sort of sneeze and it's something. And
And listen, I quite often, in the end, with clients, relate it back to the depth of the love you feel for your baby.
You don't want anything to happen. Yeah, but it's sometimes, I mean, again, I can only speak from a personal point of view. It did lift.
Yeah.
But sometimes I feel even now, if they get a bit ill and it's not the run-of-the-mill cold or flu and there's a bit of a temperature, I go back to thinking, my heart starts to race a little bit. My appetite just shuts down. And I get a bit irritable with everybody around because I'm trying to focus on making sure everything is okay. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And that kind of anxiety might feel manageable if it only happens when your baby gets sick or when your child is sick.
Yes.
But imagine if that was happening all the time.
Yeah, it's debilitating.
That becomes debilitating, and that's when we really start to think that we really need to kind of have a treatment plan here.
Yeah. Is diagnosing depression and anxiety, you said that's quite similar. You come in for a chat, basically have somebody listen to what the potential symptoms are, and then you would tailor a treatment plan for them. Yeah. So it's quite the same. Yeah,
same process of coming in for an assessment. And again, there might be some more objective assessment through questionnaires, but the majority of the assessment is very much a conversation about what you're experiencing, how it's impacting you.
Again, my other question, because we've talked about the treatment for depression, let's say on the sort of other end of the spectrum, so the most severe type of anxiety, is that treated with medication?
Yes, it can be. Absolutely.
Not just a massage and a bubble bath.
No.
Okay.
Sadly, I mean, a massage and a bubble bath sounds lovely.
Yeah, and a good book and a quiet and a coffee that has not gone cold.
That sounds like heaven.
Yeah.
But no, if it's truly a clinical anxiety and it's severe, moderate to severe, then we would definitely be looking at medication as part of the treatment protocol. And that would really be down to a psychiatrist or a good kind of mental health informed GP to prescribe that medication.
On the medication topic, I think people, they hear the word medication and absolutely, sort of arms up in the air. Nope, I don't need it. I don't want it. I'm quite afraid of it.
Yeah.
When it comes to medication, is this something that is a temporary thing? Is it a lifelong thing? Or is my question like, you can't sort of categorize it. Everybody's very, very different.
So for, it is individual.
Yeah.
For most people, it's not going to be lifelong for sure. But it's not a kind of momentary decision and I'll do it this week and then I'll stop.
Yeah. Usually
what I say to clients is when we're discussing medication as an option, because often people will come and see me, do their assessment. I'll say, listen, I think you should see the psychiatrist, have a bit of a conversation about whether medication is indicated.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it might be. And then they'll come back and say, look, the psychiatrist thinks I should, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Like you said, it feels like a big decision.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about it, what I usually say is, and the psychiatrist probably says the same, like, let's say minimum 6 months on medication. Because if we put people on medication and take them off again too quickly, that can have implications.
Yeah.
So I usually say, let's go like minimum 6 to 12 months. But at that 6 to 12 month point, if everything is going well and therapy's been really helpful, and then we can definitely look at how we're going to bring you off the medication. And I would say that coming off the medication is a bit of a journey as well.
I was going to ask that.
Having some therapy ongoing, and it might not be weekly by that stage, it might be every couple of weeks or once a month, just to kind of while you're coming off the medication and building that confidence again that actually I've got this is good. So it's not a light decision because it's not a kind of 2 weeks and then I'm off it.
Yeah, it's not a course of antibiotics.
No, it's a bit of a commitment. 6 to 12 months is probably the minimum.
But I mean, at the end of the day, it's not intimidating. It's not something that there is a plan. You're not going to be given a script and off you go.
Absolutely. And if you are, then please find another doctor because you should have a regular follow-up. Yeah. You might titrate the dose. So you might start on a very low dose and it might go up a little bit if it's not quite enough. Yeah. And then you might start to come down a little bit. And when you come off any medication, you should always be tapering off under the supervision of your GP or psychiatrist. Yeah. And never stop it.
No.
Cold.
And I'm assuming with the medication or the start of the medication, you still will go and, I guess you still will have support with a therapist on all sorts of different sort of coping mechanisms.
Yeah, because there's all the underlying thinking patterns and emotions and judgments and the kind of critical voices that tend to show up for lots of new mums around how they're doing. And I think it's really important, like I said, that kind of the recommendation for either mild, moderate or severe is talk therapy. But with moderate to severe, that's when we would recommend at least having a consultation regarding medication.
Yeah. When it comes to anxiety, is it one of those things, again, going back to predisposition?
Yes.
If you are generally an anxious person, do you find that you will probably have somewhat of a sort of inflated anxiety period post having a baby or being pregnant?
Yeah, I think people who naturally tend to be a bit more anxious do tend to find that is at the very least remains there when they've had a baby, and maybe a little bit more to deal with. Again, a diagnosis is really about intensity, duration, and severity.
Yeah. Of course, we live in the COVID era.
Yes.
Did you find that you had an influx of anxiety-related pregnancy and postnatal?
Yeah. Absolutely.
COVID.
Especially during that kind of first year when lockdown, and we still didn't know an awful lot about COVID and how it was going to impact pregnancy, how it was going to impact babies, children. So definitely in that first year, COVID really impacted women's mental health. It impacted everybody's mental health.
Absolutely.
But being pregnant and being a little bit more vulnerable anyway, I think it really did increase the presentation of
Do you know,
anxiety.
I think also it's that feeling of isolation, that lack of support, even at the time, you know, when it was complete lockdown and women were potentially having babies on their own, or her and the medical,
yes,
the
the
person.
fear of having COVID and having to go into hospital on your own without your partner, with a mask on, and being separation from your baby. That was a fear for people at that point, because in some places around the world they were separating mums and babies after if they had COVID.
And also, as I remember, I mean, I was quite pregnant in 2020.
Yes.
It was the fear of catching COVID.
Yeah.
And what could the impacts that it could have on the baby.
Absolutely. Because we didn't know still, did we? All that research was still coming out.
I was petrified. Yeah.
I was with you.
And I mean, I truly sort of blame it on that almost. I feel like that fueled that whole anxiety.
Episode.
Yeah. And so obviously when the baby was born, that was the only thing I had in my mind, you know, this type of anxiety I must protect, you know. So it's a journey.
It's definitely a journey, and COVID definitely has made it harder for women. I think even now, though we're kind of in a slightly different place with it now, a couple of years on, it definitely still plays on people's anxiety particularly. Yeah.
And I must ask, because we're in your beautiful meditation, you've opened this wonderful new practice.
Yes.
What are you planning to do?
Well, hopefully lots of lovely things for women pre and postnatally. So some pre and postnatal meditation, some postnatal mood support. One thing we haven't actually touched on, and maybe is important to mention, is birth trauma.
That's
and
right.
How that can affect
impacts
and impact. And unfortunately, so many women do experience some sort of trauma.
And I did read also with the trauma, it's the same type of thing. It's childbirth, you know. It's not something. It's
everybody does it. People go through it all the time. Yeah.
Oh, we must probably do another episode.
Maybe we should do another episode specifically on birth trauma.
Yeah.
Because it can also be implicated in the development of things like postnatal depression.
Yeah.
There are some things that are very specific to postnatal depression, like birth trauma, like difficult pregnancy, like unwanted pregnancy, or kind of difficulties with fertility. They can all impact things like postnatal depression and anxiety. Yeah. They're very pregnancy specific risk factors. Anyway, I digress, because we were talking about
we definitely, if you know, a few months down the line, that's the next episode, guys. Stay tuned.
So workshops and groups, obviously individual therapy will remain very central to what we do.
Yeah.
But hopefully later in the year there'll be lots of offerings, not just for women in pre and postnatal. We also have other services and other groups for everybody in Dubai, in the community.
That's so lovely. I mean, I'm very much looking forward to it. So once the doors officially open,
we will welcome you.
I will be happy. I'll just walk right in and just sign up for everything, whether I'm pregnant or not.
Absolutely.
Gosh, Dr. Rose, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Of course, this sort of brings up sort of the end of the episode, or the end of the interview. So with the end, I always ask my lovely guests if they've got their favorite quote or saying or something they kind of that resonates in them.
Yeah.
If you got one for us today.
I do, and I thought a little bit about this morning. And I think part of this is about recognizing that a part of pregnancy and childbirth that we don't acknowledge necessarily is how brave it is. Like you said, that people do it all the time. It's normal.
It's been happening since the beginning of time.
Yeah. And listen, that's true. And I very much value that perspective when it's used as a supportive perspective, but it can also be used very dismissively. Listen, I think there's a quote by somebody called Elizabeth Stone, and it's something, I never quite get it quite right, but making the decision to have a child is momentous. It is to decide forever to have your heart go walking around outside your body. And so I just think women are so brave and so powerful. And whatever you're experiencing, there is a way through and a way forward. You don't have to just struggle and live with it. Yeah. Just know that I know you're brave.
Yeah. Oh, that's absolutely
but here
beautiful.
to support and help you to really get to a place where you can enjoy pregnancy, enjoy birth, enjoy your baby, enjoy your children.
It's true. Enjoy it, because it is monumental.
It really is.
Oh, that's actually perfect and so fitting. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I know that you're in the middle of all of this and getting the practice set up, and I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
And this was
It's been
so
really lovely to
informative.
speak to
Even
you.
personally, I mean, I'm telling you, expect an appointment. You'll see my name on there.
I'll look forward to it.
Of course, if any of you guys would like to get in touch with Dr. Rose and book an appointment, I'm going to link everything in the show notes. It's on her website and an email and a number, so you can call and make a consultation and book an appointment.
Great.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And will definitely keep me in mind for series number 2 episode, the continuation, the next episode,
follow-up.
birth trauma, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr.
My pleasure.
Rose. Thank you for listening to They Say It Takes a Village. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I look forward to bringing you another one next week. Don't forget, please subscribe, rate, and review so I can reach and help even more parents. And if you've got a topic that you'd like me to cover, please head over to my Instagram page, ittakesavillage.me, and drop me a line.